Maria Thornton slammed her gold-plated laptop shut and threw it at John Myers' boots. "I don't need a mechanic. I need a Boeing engineer. Get him out of here." $100 million worth of state-of-the-art jet sat dead on a crumbling airstrip. 12 hours until a rival CEO's hit squad tracked her GPS signal. And the only person who could save her was a 38-year-old small-town grease monkey. She just laughed at in front of her entire security team. But here's what Maria didn't know. What nobody in that hangar knew. John Myers wasn't just some guy who fixed lawnmowers. He was the elite special ops systems engineer who once hot-wired a downed Black Hawk in hostile territory, using nothing but copper wire and a car battery. And he was about to teach a billionaire that the most dangerous weapon isn't technology. It's the man who knows how to kill it. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you are tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. John heard the jet engines failing from 2 miles away. He was under his Chevy when the sound hit. It was a specific whine of hydraulics dying and computer systems going dark. He knew that sound from Afghanistan, from the days when his job was bringing broken war machines back to life in hostile territory. He told Cassandra to stay home and grabbed his tool bag. The old Ford pickup started on the 3rd try. He drove toward the abandoned municipal airstrip. The place had been closed for 6 years. No lights, no tower, just cracked pavement and weeds. But someone had just landed a very expensive jet there. When John arrived, the jet was sitting crooked on a runway with its nose gear collapsed. Emergency lights pulsed in a pattern. 3 long, 2 short, 3 long. John recognized that pattern immediately. It wasn't system failure. It was a signal. Someone had deliberately killed this aircraft. A woman in a red dress stood at the bottom of the jet's stairs screaming into a dead phone. She had dark hair and the kind of face that was used to getting whatever it wanted. Behind her stood a bodyguard in a black suit. Professional, expensive, the kind of guy who got paid to break bones. John introduced himself. The woman said her name was Maria Thornton. She was a tech CEO. The jet had suffered total system failure 40 minutes ago at cruising altitude. Every computer, every backup, everything went dark at once. John climbed into the jet and went straight to the cockpit. The pilot and co-pilot had tried everything. Manual restarts, emergency protocols. Nothing worked. The entire system was locked. John opened the access panel under the main console. Inside, he found a small black box wired directly into the main data bus. The box wasn't part of the original aircraft. Someone had installed it. Recently, John asked the pilot if the box had been there before. The pilot had never seen it. Neither had the co-pilot. John pulled the box out and examined it. It was a logic bomb, a piece of malware designed to trigger at a specific time or location. This one had been programmed to shut down every computer system on the jet simultaneously. No warnings, no chance to recover, just instant death. But the logic bomb did something else too. It sent out a GPS signal, a beacon. Anyone who planted the device would know exactly where the jet had landed. John went back down the stairs and told Maria the truth. Her jet had malfunctioned. It had been sabotaged. Someone had tried to kill her in the air. When that failed, they locked down the aircraft so she couldn't escape. And right now, they knew exactly where she was. Maria laughed. She actually laughed. She said that was impossible. Her jet had military-grade security, triple redundancy systems, encrypted communications. No one could hack it. John held up the black box. He said someone didn't hack it. They physically installed a kill switch, probably during routine maintenance, probably paid off a technician. And now that person, or the people who hired them, were on their way to finish the job. Maria stopped laughing. She asked how long they had. John said maybe 12 hours, maybe less, depended on where the hit squad was coming from. Maria asked if John could fix the jet. She offered him money, a lot of money. $50,000 cash. She had it on the plane. John said money wasn't the problem. The problem was that every computer on the jet was locked. The logic bomb had encrypted the entire system. Even if he removed the device, the software was already corrupted. The jet's brain was dead. Replacing it would take weeks and equipment he didn't have. Maria's face went pale. She asked what they should do. Call the police? Call the FBI? John said no. If the people coming for her were professional, they'd be monitoring police channels. Any call she made would just tell them she was still alive and waiting. The best option was to run. Get off the airstrip. Disappear into the countryside until Maria's people could send help. Maria refused. She had a meeting in New York in 18 hours. A merger worth $3 billion. If she missed it, her company would collapse. Her competitors would take everything. She couldn't run. She had to get the jet flying. John said that was impossible. Not with the equipment he had. Not in 12 hours. Maria got angry. She said John was just a small-town mechanic who didn't understand high-tech systems. She needed real engineers. People from Boeing. People with diagnostic computers and replacement parts. John stayed calm. He said she was right. He was just a mechanic. But her engineers were 600 miles away. Her parts were in a warehouse in Seattle. And the people coming to kill her were probably already on the road. Maria called him useless. She said she'd call her head of security, her tech team, her lawyers, someone who actually knew what they were doing. John picked up his tool bag and started walking back to his truck. He told Maria good luck. He hoped she lived long enough to make that meeting. He was halfway to his truck when Maria's phone rang. It was her head of security. He confirmed what John had said. The jet's GPS beacon was active. A vehicle had been dispatched from a private airfield 200 miles away. ETA was approximately 10 hours. Maria asked if they could send another aircraft to pick her up. Her head of security said no. All her aircraft were grounded. Someone had filed false FAA reports claiming maintenance violations. It would take days to clear them. Maria asked about local airports, rental planes, helicopters. Her head of security said every option was blocked. Whoever wanted her dead had planned this carefully. They cut off every escape route. The only way out was to fix the jet she was standing next to. Maria hung up. She looked at John's truck driving away. She yelled his name. John stopped. Maria walked across the tarmac in her heels and her expensive red dress. She was soaking wet from the rain. She asked what it would take to fix the jet. John said he couldn't fix it. Not the way she wanted. The computers were dead, but he could bypass them. Go analog. Hotwire the systems. Make it fly manually. Maria said that was insane. The jet was computerized. Everything ran through software. You couldn't just hotwire a $100 million aircraft like it was a stolen car. John said she was right. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible, but he'd done impossible before. In the desert, in mountains, in places where there were no computer technicians and no replacement parts. Just a toolbox and a clock counting down. Maria asked if he was serious, if he could really make it work. John said maybe, 50-50 chance. But she'd have to do exactly what he said. No arguments, no questions, and she'd have to get her hands dirty. Maria looked at her manicured nails, her designer dress, her entire world of luxury and control. Then she looked at the dark sky and the empty airstrip and the knowledge that someone was coming to kill her. She agreed. John sent Cassandra a text telling her he'd be home late. He didn't tell her why. He didn't tell her about the jet or the Billionaire or the hit squad. He just said he was helping someone and to lock the doors. Cassandra texted back a thumbs-up emoji and told him to be safe. John walked back to the jet with Maria. The bodyguard, whose name was Derek, tried to stop him. He said nobody touched the aircraft without authorization. Maria told Derek to stand down. John was now in charge. John climbed into the jet and went to work. The first problem was power. The logic bomb had killed the main batteries, but there were emergency backup systems. John rerouted power from the auxiliary unit and got partial lighting restored. Not much, just enough to see. The second problem was the engines. They were controlled entirely by computers. Throttle, fuel mixture, ignition timing, everything. Without the computers, the engines were just expensive metal sculptures. John explained that they needed to bypass the digital controls and create manual overrides. That meant running new wiring, creating physical switches, essentially turning a state-of-the-art jet into something that flew like a crop duster from 1950. Maria asked how long it would take. John said 8 hours if everything went perfectly, 12 hours if it didn't. They had 10 hours before the hit squad arrived. John started tearing apart the cockpit. He pulled panels off the walls, disconnected computer modules, exposed the raw wiring underneath. Maria watched in horror as he basically destroyed the interior of her $100 million jet. John told her to stop watching and start helping. He needed copper wire, lots of it, and solder, and electrical tape. The jet didn't have those supplies. It had champagne and caviar and a $4,000 espresso machine, but no basic repair materials. John told Maria to go to his truck. In the back was a plastic bin. Inside were scrap parts from old radios, telephones, and appliances, stuff he collected over the years. She needed to bring all of it. Maria looked offended. She asked why a $100 million jet needed parts from a 1980s telephone. John said because copper is copper. Electricity doesn't care if it's running through a fiber optic cable or a Radio Shack special. It just needs a path. Maria went to the truck. She came back carrying the plastic bin. Her dress was ruined. Her shoes were caked in mud. She looked miserable. John dumped the bin out on the cockpit floor. He started sorting through parts. Circuit boards, wires, switches, resistors. He handed Maria a wire cutter and told her to start stripping insulation off the copper wires. Maria said she didn't know how. John showed her. It took 30 seconds. He told her to strip 200 wires. Each one needed to be exactly 6 inches long. Maria stared at the pile of wires. There were hundreds of them. This was manual labor, the kind of thing she paid people minimum wage to do in factories on the other side of the world. John went back to work on the engines. He opened the access panels and started tracing fuel lines. The jet used an electronic fuel injection system controlled by the main computer. Without the computer, no fuel reached the engines. John needed to bypass the electronic system and install a manual fuel pump, the kind that used physical pressure instead of sensors. He didn't have a fuel pump, but he had something close. A hand-cranked bilge pump from a boat. John asked Derek if there were any boats nearby. Marinas, docks, anything. Derek said there was a lake 3 miles away. Small recreational area. Probably had some fishing boats. John told Derek to go steal a bilge pump. Didn't matter what boat. Just grab it and go. They'd pay the owner back later. Derek said he wasn't a thief. Maria said he was now. She told him to go. Derek left. John kept working. He pulled more panels, disconnected more wires. The jet was becoming less of an aircraft and more of a puzzle. A very expensive, very complicated puzzle that John was solving one piece at a time. Maria finished stripping the wires. Her hands were sore. She had blisters forming on her palms. She'd never done physical labor like this. Her life was boardrooms and private clubs and conference calls for Mediterranean yachts. John handed her a soldering iron. He told her to start connecting wires according to a diagram he'd drawn on a piece of paper. Red to red, black to black. If she mixed them up, the whole thing would short out and possibly catch fire. Maria's hand shook. She'd never soldered anything. She asked what would happen if she made a mistake. John said they'd probably die when the jet exploded on takeoff. Maria asked if he was joking. John said no. Maria took the soldering iron and started working. She moved slowly, carefully. Each connection took minutes. John worked 10 times faster, but he was doing the complicated parts. Maria was doing the grunt work, the repetitive stuff, the boring stuff. Hours passed. The rain stopped. The temperature dropped. Inside the jet, it was freezing. John and Maria worked without speaking. Just the sound of tools and wires, and the occasional curse when something didn't fit right. Derek came back with the bilge pump. He'd stolen it from a fishing boat at the lake. He looked guilty about it. John took the pump and started installing it. It wasn't pretty. He had to cut through the jet's pristine floor panels to access the fuel lines. He had to drill holes, use zip ties, make it work with whatever he had. Maria watched him turn her luxury jet into a Frankenstein machine. She asked if this would really work. John said it would work enough. The jet wouldn't be smart anymore. It wouldn't have autopilot or computer-assisted anything. It would fly the way planes flew 70 years ago. Manual controls, human reflexes, no safety nets. Maria said she couldn't fly like that. She didn't know how. Her pilots always used the computer systems. John said she was going to learn, because if the hit squad showed up before they were done, Maria would be the one flying, not her pilots, not anyone else, just her. Maria looked terrified. She said that was impossible. She'd taken a few flying lessons years ago, but never finished. She couldn't handle a jet. John said she didn't have a choice. He kept working. By hour 6, the cockpit looked like a disaster. Wires everywhere, tools scattered, panels removed. But slowly, something was taking shape. A new system. Crude, simple, but functional. John connected the last wire and tested the fuel pump. It worked. He primed the engines manually using the hand crank. It took 20 minutes of constant pumping, but eventually fuel reached the combustion chambers. John told the pilot to try starting the engines. The pilot flipped the manual ignition switch John had installed. Nothing happened. John checked his connections, found a loose wire, fixed it, told the pilot to try again. This time, the left engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Everyone in the cockpit froze. The sound was beautiful. It was power. It was hope. John told the pilot to start the right engine. The pilot flipped the second switch. The right engine started immediately. Both engines were running. The jet was alive. Not smart, not elegant, but alive. Maria started crying. Actual tears. She hugged John without thinking about it, then immediately stepped back and apologized. John didn't care. He was already moving to the next problem. The nose gear was collapsed. They couldn't take off with the gear broken. John climbed out of the jet and examined the damage. The gear hadn't broken. It had been retracted by the logic bomb and then locked in place. The hydraulic system was frozen. John needed to manually release the locks and extend the gear. That meant crawling under the jet with a wrench and disconnecting the hydraulic lines. He slid under the nose. The ground was wet and cold. He worked by flashlight. His hands were numb. The bolts were rusted and tight. Maria appeared next to him, lying on the ground, shining a flashlight for him. John asked what she was doing. Maria said helping. She was already filthy. Might as well go all the way. John didn't argue. He worked faster with the extra light. After 30 minutes, he disconnected the hydraulic locks. He manually cranked the nose gear down. It locked into place with a satisfying click. They slid out from under the jet. Both of them were covered in mud and oil. Maria's red dress was completely destroyed. John checked his watch. 2 hours until the hit squad arrived. They had one more problem. The logic bomb was still sending a GPS signal. Even if they took off, the hit squad would be able to track them. John needed to kill the signal. That meant finding the transmitter and destroying it. But the transmitter was integrated into the jet's main computer system. If he pulled it out, He might destroy the manual controls he just built. John thought for a minute. Then he had an idea. Instead of destroying the transmitter, he could block it, create a Faraday cage around the jet's electronics, a shield that would prevent any signals from getting out. He told Maria he needed aluminum foil, lots of it, and metal mesh, anything conductive. Maria went to the jet's galley. She came back with rolls of aluminum foil from the kitchen. John also sent Derek to find chicken wire or metal screen from nearby buildings. Derek came back with a roll of chain link fence material he'd ripped off an old gate. John started wrapping the jet's computer bay in aluminum foil, layer after layer. Then he wrapped the chain link material around the foil. It looked ridiculous, but it worked. The GPS signal stopped transmitting. Anyone tracking the jet would see it disappear from their screens. They'd know it was still at the airstrip, but they wouldn't be able to follow it once it took off. John checked his watch again. 1 hour. They were ready. The jet could fly. The gear was down. The signal was blocked. But John had one more thing to do. He had to teach Maria how to fly. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My dad said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show him that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now let's continue. John brought Maria into the cockpit and sat her in the pilot's seat. She looked at the controls and immediately panicked. There were dozens of switches, levers, gauges, all of them manual now. None of them labeled in a way that made sense to someone used to computer screens. John explained the basics. Throttle controls engine power. Yoke controls pitch and roll. Rudder pedals control yaw. It was simpler than she thought. Flying was mostly just balancing forces. Push this, pull that. Feel the plane. React to what it tells you. Maria said she couldn't do it. She wasn't a pilot. She'd crash. John said she wouldn't be alone. The pilot and co-pilot would do most of the work. But if something went wrong, if they got hit or injured, Maria needed to be able to take over, even for just a few minutes, long enough to get away. Maria put her hands on the yoke. They were shaking. John put his hands over hers. He told her to breathe, to trust herself. He said flying wasn't about being perfect. It was about being calm, making decisions, adjusting when things went wrong. He walked her through a basic takeoff sequence. Throttle to 70%. Feel the acceleration. Pull back on the yoke at 140 knots. Keep the nose up. Level off at 5,000 feet. Maria repeated the steps. She asked what happened if she messed up. John said they'd die. But that was true, whether she knew how to fly or not. At least this way, they had a chance. Headlights appeared on the access road. 2 vehicles, black SUVs, moving fast. Derek saw them first. He shouted a warning. John looked at his watch. The hit squad was early. They had maybe 5 minutes before the SUVs reached the airstrip. John told everyone to get on the jet now. No time to argue. No time to plan. The pilot and co-pilot jumped into their seats. Maria climbed into the jump seat behind them. Derek stood at the door with his gun drawn. John was still outside. He ran to the nose gear and pulled the chocks away from the wheels. Then he sprinted to the tail and did the same. The SUVs were half a mile away. John climbed the stairs and pulled the door shut. He told Derek to lock it. Then he ran to the cockpit. The pilot was already starting the taxi. The engines were warm. The controls were responsive. The jet started moving. The SUVs arrived at the perimeter fence. Men jumped out, 6 of them, all armed. They started cutting through the chain link fence. The pilot turned the jet toward the runway. The old pavement was cracked and uneven. The ride was rough, but the jet kept moving. One of the men from the SUVs raised a rifle. He fired. The bullet hit the jet's fuselage with a metallic ping. Then another. Derek moved to a window and fired back. His shots were controlled. Professional. He hit one of the men, then another. The rest took cover behind the SUVs. The jet reached the runway. The pilot pushed the throttle forward. The engines roared. The speed increased. 60 knots, 80 knots, 100 knots. More gunfire. A bullet shattered one of the cockpit windows. Glass exploded everywhere. The co-pilot took a piece of glass to the face. He yelled in pain but kept his hands on the controls. 120 knots, 130 knots. The pilot pulled back on the yoke. The nose lifted. The main gear left the ground. The jet was flying. More bullets hit the tail section. One of them punctured the fuel tank. Fuel started leaking. A thin trail of vapor following the jet into the sky. John saw it on the gauges. Fuel pressure dropping. They were losing gas fast. At this rate, they'd run out in 30 minutes. Maybe less. John grabbed a fire extinguisher from the emergency locker. He told Maria to come with him. They went to the cabin and opened the floor panel that led to the cargo bay. Below was the fuel tank and the bullet hole. Fuel was spraying out in a thin stream. The smell was overwhelming. One spark and the whole jet would explode. John told Maria to hold the flashlight. He climbed down into the cargo bay. The space was tight, barely enough room to move. He crawled to the fuel tank. The hole was small, maybe the size of a dime. But at high pressure, even a small hole was catastrophic. John needed to plug it. He didn't have a proper repair kit. He had duct tape and super glue. That was it. He wrapped duct tape around the hole. The fuel pressure ripped it off immediately. He tried again with more layers. Same result. He needed something stronger, something that could handle pressure and fuel corrosion. John looked around the cargo bay. There were suitcases, equipment, Maria's belongings. He opened one of the suitcases. Inside was clothing, jewelry, a laptop, nothing useful. He opened another. More clothing. But at the bottom was a small cosmetic bag. Inside was nail polish remover, hand cream, and a tube of epoxy resin for broken nails. John grabbed the epoxy. It was a 2-part formula. You mix the resin and hardener together, and it created a chemical bond. It was meant for fingernails, but John had seen similar formulas used in field repairs. He mixed the epoxy on a piece of metal. Then he pressed it into the bullet hole. He held it there for 60 seconds. The epoxy started to harden. The fuel leak slowed, then stopped. It wasn't perfect. The repair would only last a few hours. But they only needed a few hours. John climbed back up to the cabin. He was soaking wet with jet fuel. Maria looked at him in horror. John told her it was fine. The leak was stopped. They'd make it to New York. Maria asked how he knew. John said he didn't. But the alternative was dying in the next 10 minutes. So he was choosing optimism. The co-pilot called from the cockpit. They were being followed. 2 small planes had taken off from a nearby private airfield. They were faster than the jet. They'd catch up in 15 minutes. John went to the cockpit. He looked at the radar. 2 blips closing fast. He asked the pilot how fast the jet could go. The pilot said normally 500 knots. But with the manual controls and the damaged fuel tank, maybe 400. The planes following them could do 450. They were going to be caught. John thought fast. The jet couldn't outrun the planes. But maybe it didn't have to. Maybe it just had to outlast them. John asked how much fuel the pursuing planes had. The pilot said probably enough for 2 hours of flight time. John said they needed to make those 2 hours hurt. He told the pilot to take them low, 50 feet above the ground. Make the planes work to keep up. The pilot said that was insane. Flying that low at night with manual controls was suicide. John said getting shot down was also suicide. At least this way they had a chance. The pilot didn't argue. He pushed the yoke forward. The jet dropped. They fell through the clouds. Through the darkness. The altimeter spun down. 5,000 feet. 3,000 feet. 1,000 feet. 500 feet. The ground appeared below them. Trees, hills, roads, all of it rushing past at 400 knots. The pilot leveled off at 50 feet. The jet screamed over the landscape. It was terrifying. One mistake, and they'd hit the ground and explode. The pursuing planes followed. They tried to stay close. But at that altitude, every gust of wind, every thermal was a threat. Flying low required total concentration. The jet flew over a highway. Cars below looked up in shock as a $100 million aircraft passed 20 feet over their heads. The jet flew over a lake. The engines kicked up water spray. The cockpit windows were covered in mist. The pilot kept the jet level. His hands were steady. His face was calm. This was what he'd trained for. This was what he was good at. One of the pursuing planes fell back. The pilot couldn't handle the stress. He climbed to a safer altitude. The second plane stayed close. It was right behind the jet, maybe 200 feet back. John saw the plane in the rear camera. He recognized the type, a small twin-engine prop plane. Expensive, fast, and it had a weapon. He could see a gun mount on the wing. The plane opened fire. Bullets ripped through the air. Most missed, but one hit the jet's tail. Alarms started blaring. The rudder controls were damaged. The pilot struggled to keep the jet straight. Without full rudder control, they were flying crooked. The jet wanted to spin. John ran back to the tail section. He opened the access panel and looked at the damage. The hydraulic line to the rudder was severed. No pressure meant no control. John needed to create manual rudder control. He grabbed a steel cable from the emergency kit. He fed it through the tail section and connected it to the rudder mechanism. Then he ran the cable back to the cabin. He handed the cable to Maria. He told her to pull left when the pilot said left. Pull right when the pilot said right. She was now the rudder. Maria stared at the cable. She asked if he was serious. John said completely serious. She was the only thing keeping them in the air. The pilot called out commands. Left. Right, center. Maria pulled the cable. The jet responded. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't elegant. But it worked. They flew like that for 20 minutes. Maria's hands were raw. The cable was cutting into her skin. But she didn't let go. The pursuing plane kept firing. But the pilot was getting tired. Flying that low for that long was exhausting. His shots were getting less accurate. Finally, the plane broke off. It climbed to a higher altitude and turned back. It didn't have enough fuel to keep chasing. The jet was alone in the sky. John told the pilot to climb. Get to 10,000 feet. Give everyone a chance to breathe. The pilot pulled back on the yoke. The jet climbed. Slowly, carefully, like an injured animal limping home. They were going to make it. The sun came up somewhere over Pennsylvania. John stood in the cockpit and watched the light spread across the horizon. He'd been awake for 30 hours. His hands were covered in cuts and burns. His clothes were soaked in fuel and oil. But they were alive. Maria sat in the jump seat behind the pilot. She still held the steel cable that controlled the rudder. Her hands were bleeding. She hadn't complained once. The pilot said they were 40 minutes from New York. He could see the city on the horizon. John asked about fuel. The pilot checked the gauges. They had 10 minutes worth of fuel. Maybe less. The leak had slowed but never fully stopped. They'd been burning fuel the entire flight. John said they needed to land now. Not New York. Somewhere closer. Anywhere with a runway. The pilot looked at the map. There was a small regional airport 15 miles away. Single runway. No tower. But it was paved. John told him to go for it. The pilot turned the jet. The manual controls were sluggish. The jet didn't want to respond. But slowly it came around. They descended toward the airport. The runway appeared below them. It looked tiny. Way too small for a jet this size. The pilot said they had one shot. No fuel for a second approach. If they missed, they'd crash. John told Maria to keep steady pressure on the rudder cable. Don't pull too hard. Don't let go too soon. Just keep them straight. Maria nodded. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. But she didn't let go. The pilot lined up with the runway. The jet was coming in too fast. The manual controls didn't have the precision of the computer system. They were dropping at 700 feet per minute instead of 500. The ground rushed up. Trees, fences, then pavement. The pilot pulled back on the yoke. The nose lifted. The main gear hit the runway hard. The jet bounced, then hit again. The tires screamed. The brakes engaged. The jet skidded down the runway. They were doing 80 knots, 70 knots, 60 knots. The end of the runway was approaching. Fast. The pilot hit the brakes harder. The tires were smoking. The smell of burning rubber filled the cabin. 50 knots, 40 knots, 30 knots. The jet stopped with 20 feet of runway left. Everyone sat in silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Maria let go of the cable. Her hands were raw meat. Blood dripped onto the floor. But she smiled. Actually smiled. She said that was the most terrifying thing she'd ever done. John said welcome to his world. They climbed out of the jet. The morning air was cool and clean. John called Cassandra and told her he was okay. He'd be home soon. She asked if everything was all right. John said yes. Just a long night. Maria made phone calls. Her team was already on the way. Another jet would be there in 2 hours. She'd still make her meeting. Barely. But she'd make it. She asked John how much she owed him. John said $50,000. That was the deal. Maria laughed. She said that was an insult. She'd pay him $500,000. Cash. Wired to whatever account he wanted. Anonymously. No records. No taxes. Just money for saving her life. John said he didn't need that much. Maria said it wasn't about what he needed. It was about what he earned. She also said she was going to do something else. Something more valuable than money. She asked for John's full name, his social security number, his military records, every piece of digital information about him. John asked why. Maria said because she was going to erase it. All of it. She owned a tech company. She had access to databases, government systems, financial records. She could make John disappear from the internet, make him a ghost, the kind of ghost that couldn't be tracked, couldn't be found, couldn't be targeted. John asked if she could really do that. Maria said she could, and she would, because John had given her something nobody else could. He'd given her survival without technology. He'd shown her that the smartest systems in the world could be beaten by copper wire and duct tape. That was a lesson worth protecting. 2 weeks later, John Myers didn't exist in any database. His credit history was gone. His military records were classified beyond access. His social media profiles were deleted. His tax records were transferred to a shell corporation. He was invisible. Maria Thornton went to her meeting in New York. She closed her $3 billion merger. Her company thrived. But she never forgot the night she stood in the rain and learned that wealth meant nothing when your jet was broken. She kept a piece of copper wire on her desk. A reminder, technology could fail. Money could disappear. But skill, real skill, the kind you earn with your hands and your brain, that lasted forever. John went back to his garage, back to his Chevy, back to his life with Cassandra. He didn't tell her about the jet or the hit squad or the billionaire. He just made her breakfast and helped her with her homework and lived his quiet, invisible life. But sometimes, late at night, when he was under a car with grease on his hands and music on the radio, he smiled. Because he'd won a war that nobody knew was being fought. He'd beaten a $100 million machine with a toolbox from the 1980s. And that was worth more than any amount of money. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. If you're listening right now, Help me prove something wrong. My dad said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers. But I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show him that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. And here's what I need to know. Do you want part 2?